Deep inside the crumbling 13-story concrete monolith of building 93 at the abandoned Kings Park Psychiatric Center. Isolated on the desolate edges of Long Island. Miles of dead corridors, rusted hydrotherapy tubs, and shattered day rooms stretching into the pitch black. The heavy smell of damp dust, stale medicine, decomposing timber, and cold Atlantic air. Keep that distorted Beats Brie organ loop locked tight in the track layout. No mainstream hooks, no commercial shortcuts. Strictly the raw way to the institutional ghost. Listen close.
Yo. Stepping through the wall where the shadows intersect, leaving no trace of the digital disrespect. I split the organ loop till the drawbar started grind, forging a bleak blueprint for the uncompromised mind. The heavy bass line hits like a shock every jolt, operating in the dark like a loose industrial bolt. The wooden snare cracks like a window frame breaking, exposing the raw truth that the industry is faking. We skip the radio schemes and the media applause. We just decode the patterns within the structural flaws. Just a midnight phantom decoding the ancient script, watching how the timeline of the century got flipped. Distorted organ chords bleeding through the empty ward, low and bass lines tracking where the shadows fall hard. We keep the underground sacred through the structural cracks. Uncut tape hiss, delivering the facts. Yeah, a distant rose accent echoes on a secondary track. Got a vault full of heat that the majors couldn't pack. Analytical focus, observing how the system decays, piercing straight through the artificial graphic displays. We chop the minor progression till the tape begins to drag, planting the raw standard like a midnight rebel flag. The drum sample of Knox with that vintage garage smoke, delivering the exact rhythm that the critics never spoke. Keep the heavy leather zipped against the institution shield, tracking the heavy cadence till the master tape is still. No cinematic compromises, no diluted pop sound, just the weight of the pavement running deep underground. Distorted organ chords bleeding through the empty ward, low and bass lines tracking where the shadows fall hard. We keep the underground sacred through the structural cracks. Uncut tape hiss, delivering the facts. Now the real hits the aluminum flange on the final spin, but the narrative survives before the daylight creeps in. We leave the raw doctrine etched deep in the lead paint, long after the system labels the poet a saint. The kick drum is thumping like a pulse in the stone, a cold testament to the words delivered alone. The signal slowly fades into the static of the grid, a grim artifact of the secrets that the architecture hid. Underground frequency remains absolute and strict. The after-hours theory is the zone we predict. We exit the perimeter and vanish in the frost. Now we had a world of rapings running bleed in the frost. Yeah, asylum logic. Let the static bleed out, bleed out. Heavy and analog pressure. After hours theory. We out, we out. Now. We up. Yeah, graveyard logic. Let the vinyl static bleed out. Uncut analog pressure. Dying current. We out. We out. We out. Yeah. We oughta, yo. It wasn't anybody, muddy marshy edge of the art, the kill boat graveyard. On the industrial outer rim of Staten Island. Dozens of decomposing 20th century tugboats, historic ferries, and creaking cargo barges left to rot in the black water. Their ribs exposed like skeletal whales under the stars. The heavy smell of salt, crust, diesel residue, decaying oak and cold coastal sulfur. Keep that dusty Ogo loop running raw in the layout. No radio shortcuts, no polished template, strictly uncut and allow pressure from the cemetery of the Atlantic fleet. Listen close, listen close, listen close, yeah. Trudging through the marshland where the iron holes ride, etching permanent syllables in this forgotten spot. I chop the oboe sequence till the wooden reed snaps, drafting out a blueprint that eludes the radar maps. The low frequency hums through the saltwater corrosion while the narrative triggers an internal explosion. The snare drops hard like a heavy mooring line, breaking through the silence of the industrial design. We don't buy the metrics or the algorithmic praise, we just witness how the climate of the century decays. Just an isolated witness tracking rust on the crane, pouring raw ink directly through the skeletal remains. Eerie elbow melodies drifting past the broken deck, thick bass lines pounding while the wooden holes wreck. We keep the frequency heavy through the tidal debris, uncompressed acetate operating wild and free. Yeah, the mellotron core hovers on the secondary lane, got a catalog of friction running deep inside the brain. Cold mechanical logic dissecting every frame, refusing to participate in their commercial game. We segment the minor scale till the ribbon begins to hiss, delivering the cold doctrine that the pop charts miss. The drum machine is knocking with an unquantized swing, the exact type of project where the shadow riders sing. Keep the heavy canvas collar turned against the coastal frost, calculating profits from the things the city lost until the oxide flakes from the edge of the strip. We preserve the raw thesis in its absolute grip. Listen close, yeah. Eerie humble melodies drifting past the broken deck, thick bass lines pounding while the wooden holes wreck. We keep the frequency heavy through the tidal debris, uncompressed acetate operating wide and free. Now the plastic reel is turning on its very last revolution, leaving behind a heavy uncut audio solution. We leave the mathematical equations written in the grease long after the tides bring the final absolute peace. The kick drum is thumping like a distant diesel piston stroke, a solid monument to the heavy words we spoke. The arrangement slowly dissolves into the morning sea fog, a grim artifact recorded in the captain's log. Coastal energy stay permanent, the focus is defined. The iron current is the only thing we leave behind. We step back onto the gravel and we vanish from the shore. Yeah. Graveyard logic. Let the vinyl static bleed out. Uncutting alloy pressure. The iron current. We out. Dear, hollow whistling of a midnight wind rushing through a web of suspended steel cables, followed by the dry. We out. Metallic tomorrow and Flushing Meadows, Corona Park, Queens. Masses. Decaying yellow steel pillars shooting into the midnight fog. Weeds bursting through the rotten multicolored terrestrial map of New York State on the ground below. The three rusted observation towers cutting like concrete mushrooms into the dark sky. The heavy smell of damp moss, oxidized paint, old industrial grease and marshy park air. Keep that muffled diagonal sequence looping raw on the master track. No radio hooks, no algorithmic formulas, strictly uncut structural pressure from the architectural ghost of the World's Fair. Listen close, tracing geometric lines where the yellow metal splits, isolating frequencies before the power circuit quits. A slices dive a through loop till the matter strikes the store, forging an anonymous script inside its open air court. The low end of bruising basses vibrating through the soil while the night prowlers disconnect from the consumer coil. The wooden snare drops like a structural support beam breaking, exposing the fragile illusions that the mainstream is making. We don't buy the digital metrics or the temporary praise, we just document the architecture as the century decays. Just a midnight phantom leaving footprints on the rotting map, escaping the confinement of the modern culture of trash. They find the wrong keys echoing through the empty space. Heavy drums seem sitting with a cold unquantized pace. We keep the bass line locked beneath the skeletal frame. They find the wrong keys echoing through the empty space. Heavy drums seem sitting with a cold unquantized pace. We keep the bass line locked beneath the skeletal frame. Yeah, the bass clearing that lingers on the secondary channel bank, extracting heavy syllables from a rusted oil tank. Analytical perspective, keeping the perimeter secure, ensuring that the final audio remains completely pure. We chop the minor chord progression till the tape begins to drag, hoisting a raw standard like an unlabeled black flag. The vintage sampler knocks with that uncompressed grit, the exact type of winter project that the radio program split. Keep the heavy denim collar turned against the midnight draft, watching how the corporate mechanism manipulates the craft until the magnetic ribbon hits the end of the guidepost. We preserve the raw thesis like an undefeated ghost. Boogie find the rough keys echoing through the empty space. Heavy drum sequences hitting with a cold, unquantized pace. We keep the bass line locked beneath the skeleton frame. Boogie find the rough keys echoing through the empty space. Heavy drum sequences hitting with a cold, unquantized pace. We keep the bass line locked beneath the skeleton frame. Now the oxide is scraping on the final aluminum flange, but the syllable survives and there's nothing left to change. We lead the mathematics written deep in the scaling rust, long after the empire turns to architecture and alignment dust. The kick drum is thumping like a heavy industrial compressor, a permanent monument to the words of the unlisted professor. The arrangement slowly sinks into the morning bird calls, leaving nothing but echoes bouncing off the concrete walls. Retro-futuristic energy, the blueprint is defined. The phantom ledger is the only broadcast left behind. We scale the chain link barrier and vanish in the mist. Yeah. Pavilion logic. Let the vinyl static bleed out. Crystalline resonance. The phantom ledger. We out. Yeah. The distant low-frequency electrical hum of an approaching Amtrak train vibrating through the steel-tie plate, slowed by the dry, hollow rattle and empty spray paint and rolling across gravel or dusty. Low-pass filtered upright piano loop in the dark, playing an unquantized. The tune jazz noir phrase with a broken sustained pedal. Lady 92 BPM break drops. The kick hits distorted and muddy. The snare snaps dry and crisp over a continuous layer of thick vinyl crackle. A gritty, low-tone voice speaks instantly. 3:31 a.m. Deep inside the pitch black concrete cavern of the Ebony abandoned freedom tunnel running right beneath Riverside Park on Manhattan's Upper West Side. Massive retaining walls covered in decades of legendary fading aerosol murals, active steel tracks humming in the dark. The heavy smell of damp soot, old kerosene, brake dust, and wet concrete mold. Keep that fractured piano loop locked tight in the track layout. No commercial edits, no industry compromises. Strictly raw tape, dynamics from the underbelly of the west side. Listen close, yeah. Listen close, yeah. Moving through the transit vault, stepping on the gravel beds, writing verses underneath the city where the static spreads. I split the piano loop until the ivory notes fracture, capturing the raw tint that the labels cannot manufacture. The low end frequencies rattle through the tie plates, while the third rail watches how the rhythm calculates. A snare hits crisp like a spray can nozzle pop, delivering the standard that the radios will never drop. We don't buy the promotion, no gimmicks or the fake trends. We just draft the layout where the actual marrow ends. Just a midnight shadow leaving ink upon the brickwork, navigating areas where the silent rail spikes lurk.
The tune piano keys echoing down the concrete hall, heavy drum patterns driving while the shadows crawl. We keep the bass line locked beneath the street level grid. Raw tape dynamics is fitted.
Yeah, muffled horn accent drifts on the secondary track. Got a notebook full of friction that the editors would slash. Strict observation, seeing how the corporate medium warps, cutting through the optical illusions of the pop chords. We slice the minor cadence till the real gives a stutter, feeding raw thoughts straight to the dwellers of the gutter. The drum engine thumps with that uncompressed dirt, the precise type of underground language they wanna hurt. Keep the denim jacket button close against the damp breeze, watching how the industry machine makes the weak freeze until the magnetic ribbon hits the end of the spool. We preserve the raw thesis sharp as a surgical tool.
Detune piano keys echoing down the concrete hall, heavy drum patterns driving while the shadows crawl. We keep the bass line locked beneath the street level grid. Raw tape dynamics revealing what darkest hid. Feeling what darkest hid. Feeling what darkest hid. Feeling what darkest hid.
Detune piano keys echoing down the concrete hall. Heavy drum patterns driving while the shadows crawl. We keep the bassline locked beneath the street level grid.
Raw tape dynamics revealing
Now
without
the
a shit.
oxide is scraping on the final guidepost, but the syllable survives like an undefeated ghost. We leave the signature scratched into the damn rust long after the system turns the architecture into lime and dust. The kick drum is thumping like an industrial exhaust fan, a heavy monument built by the forgotten man. The mix slowly sinks into the ventilation hiss, a cold testament to the format that the charts miss. Aerosol energy stays permanent, the focus is pure. The midnight blueprint is the only thing that will endure. We climb the emergency ladder and we exit into the night. Yeah. Double Kaji. Let the vinyl static bleed out. Raw tape dynamics. With darker shit. Revealing with darker shit. With darker shit. Revealing with darker shit. We out. Midnight blueprint. We out. We out.
Yeah. Hollow rattling of a massive iron hangar bay door buckled by coastal gales, followed by the urbanic Floyd Bennett field on the windy coast of South Brooklyn. Massive. Decaying aviation sheds where the first transatlantic pilots tune their engines. Dead runways overgrown with beach grass stretching toward Jamaica Bay. The stinging smell of aviation grease, salt crust, rusted hydraulic fluid, and cold ocean fog. Keep that gravelly baritone sax sequence looping raw on the master reel. No synthesized sheen, no commercial playlist formula, strictly uncut mechanical pressure from the cradle of flight. Listen close. Stepping past the aluminum ribs where the engines die, recording every variable with the Atlantic wind outside. I fracture the saxophone loop until the reeds begin to distort, constructing an unlisted manual within this coastal court. The sub-frequencies hum through the cracked runway tar while the navigation lights flicker weak from afar. The snare drum drops like an old hydraulic valve giving way, slicing straight through the quiet at the break of day. We bypass the media brokers in the synthetic applause. We just catalog the friction within the systemic flaws. Just a nocturnal rider leaving carbon on the metal frame, erasing the digital markers that are tied to a generic name. Saxophone, no frequency. Runway floor, heavy drum arrangements hitting outside the hangar door. We keep the signal tracking through the oxidized sheet metal. Saxophone notes echoing down the runway floor, heavy drum arrangements hitting outside the hangar door. We keep the signal tracking through the oxidized sheet metal. The tremolo roads up is on a parallel track matrix, isolating honest dialogue from they promotes the theatrics. Strict operational focus, keeping the audio blueprint clean, refusing to slice the perspective for the digital screen. We chop the minor chord changes until magnetic tape flutters, providing an authentic frequency for the outcasts in the gutters. The drum sampler punches with that uncompressed garage heat, the exact type of winter catalog that the charts can't repeat. Keep the flight jacket fast and tight against the bay moisture, treating the entire metropolis like a cold closed oyster until the dark oxide flakes off the edge of the plastic band. We hold the position secure on a stretch of abandoned land. Radio drum, saxophone notes echoing down the runway floor, heavy drum arrangements hitting outside the hangar door. We keep the signal tracking through the oxidized sheet metal. Radio drum, saxophone notes echoing down the runway floor, heavy drum arrangements hitting outside the hangar door. We keep the signal tracking through the oxidized sheet metal. Now the tape guide is scratching on the final few feet of string, but the architecture remains unaffected by what the seasons bring. We leave the raw coordinates stamped deep in the cockpit rust long after the commercial industry dissolves in the lime and dust. The kick drum is thumping like a twin propeller starter crank, a rugged monument recorded on a blank financial ledger bank. The audio slowly submerges into the early morning radio hum, a cold documentation of where the actual narratives come from. Aviation energy stays permanent, the target is locked and tight. The albatross formula dominates the remainder of the night. We secure the perimeter latch and we vanish in the gray. Yeah. Hang a logic. Let the vinyl static bleed out. Raw and a loud friction. Albatross formula. Bingo. Bingo. Saxophone notes echoing down. Friction. The Albatross formula. We out.
sheds where the first trends.
The distant boom of heavy Atlantic surf crashing against subterranean concrete barriers, followed by the dry.
What is the boom of Atlantic surf crashing? What is the boom of Atlantic surf crashing? What is the boom of Atlantic surf crashing?
Yeah, 4:51 a.m. Deep inside the pitch black abandoned concrete artillery bunkers of Fort Tilden, isolated on the windswept edge of the Rockaway Peninsula, Queens. Massive decay in World War II fortifications buried beneath shifting sand dunes. Empty shell magazines stretching into the damp dark. The heavy smell of salt rot, dead seaweed, oxidized steel, and no gunpowder residue. Keep that Raspencello sequence looping raw on a master track. No commercial matters, no radio-friendly formula. Strictly uncompressed tape friction from the edge of the Atlantic shelf. Listen close. Yeah. Stepping through the gun mounts where the rebar bleeds, scattering the syllables like windblown seeds. I chop the cello sequence till the lower notes distort, leaving heavy evidence inside this coastal fort. The low frequency hums through the bunker floor while the high tide rises past the blast-proof door. The snare snaps sharp like a frozen tripwire string, isolating every single sentence that I bring. We ignore the media channels and the radio chart. We just isolate the specimen and tear it apart. Just an unlisted name moving silent through the dunes, spitting raw definitions over dark jazz tunes. Mournful cello strings echoing through the concrete block, thick drum patterns hitting while the ocean waves shock. We keep the frequency pure on the edge of the coast, uncompressed acetate leaving a permanent post. Mournful cello strings echoing through the concrete block, thick drum patterns hitting while the ocean waves shock. We keep the frequency pure on the edge of the coast, uncompressed acetate leaving a permanent post. Yeah, the faint road chime floats on a secondary deck. Got a notebook full of math from a total system wreck. Strict analytical view, observing the machine, refusing to alter the transmission for the screen. We split the minor interval until the ribbon starts to weave, leaving nothing but the absolute truth for you to achieve. The drum engine bangs with that unquantized swing, the exact type of raw material pioneers bring. Keep the field jacket button to the throat for the chill, measuring the density until the master tape is still. No synthetic polish or diluted sound design, just the natural weight of the boundary line. Mournful cello strings echoing through the concrete block, thick drum patterns hitting while the ocean waves shock. We keep the frequency pure on the edge of the coast, uncompressed acetate leaving a permanent post. Mournful cello strings echoing through the concrete block, thick drum patterns hitting while the ocean waves shock. We keep the frequency pure on the edge of the coast, uncompressed acetate leaving a permanent post. Now the oxide is scraping on the final metal post, but the transmission is locked from coast to coast. We leave the calculations buried deep in the sand, long after the tide reclaims the stretch of land. The kick drum is thumping like a heavy surf break, a solid monument for the statements that we make. The arrangement slowly fades into the morning fog bank, a grim registration on a blank memory tank. Coastal frequency stays permanent, the vision is exact. The Atlantic protocol is an unyielding fact. We step out of the bunker and we disappear in the gray.
Instantly on the sharp snare, hit the crackle, hit the crackle, hit the crackle, hit the crackle.
Yeah. Battery logic. Let the vinyl static play out. Saturated tape friction. The Atlantic protocol. We out. We out. We out. We out. We out.
We're instantly on a sharp snare, hit the crackle, hit the crackle, hit the crackle. What does the roll with love Atlantic surf crashing? We're instantly on a sharp snare, the crackle, the crackle, the crackle.
The dry echoic stare.
The fly low for dusty. The fly low for dusty, low pass filtered. The fly low for dusty.
Low pass filter jazz trombone loop emerges from the dark.
blowing the smoky, dragging minor phrase with a heavy cup mute effect. It is layered with the faint, chillin' subtle chime and the thick walking Kamass line. Without a single second of delay, the 80 pp brim break drops. The kick hits loose, warm, and deeply saturated. The snare snaps with the gritty, unquantized thud over a continuous hiss of age, lacquer, acetate, crackle. A gritty low tone voice speaks instantly. 2:54 a.m. Standing dead center on the crumbling collapse stage of the abandoned arcade. Y'all keep staring, Flushing, Queens. A once majestic 1920 Vaudeville palace, now rotting in total isolation. The mass of plaster proscenium arch peeling away above. Shredded Spanish velvet curtains hanging like decaying rags in the gloom. Rusted film projector housings looking down from the shattered balcony. The heavy smell of dry rot, old stage oil, damn velvet, and decade. Your trapped theater dust. Keep that muted trombone phrase looping raw without any digital cleaning. No artificial stadium glare, no plastic pop choreography. Strictly the unvarnished acoustics of the final curtain call. Listen close. Stepping past the orchestra pit where the floorboards give, documenting how the actual underground poets live. I slice the drum loop until the brass notes fray, painting a stark portrait of the metropolitan decay. The low pause vibrates through the orchestra stalls while the echoes of dead applause bounce off the walls. The wooden snare drops like a heavy iron fire curtain line, slicing right through the illusions of their corporate design. We don't audition for the managers or wait for a cue. We just dissect the script and expose what is true. Just an uncredited author writing lines in the debris, setting the dial to a frequency they never will see. Muted brass notes drifting through the balcony tear. Heavy drum arrangement dropping cold and severe. We keep the dialogue authentic while the scenery breaks. Raw acetate friction, ignoring what the industry fakes. Yeah, the celestial chime lingers on a parallel stem. Got a head full of leverage that I won't share with them. Strict observation from the high projection booth floor, watching how the media vultures police the stage door. We chop the minor walls until the playback head jumps, feeding raw voltage to the dwellers of the dumps. The vintage sampler hits with that uncompressed suit, leaving an indelible mark where the corporate can't foot. Keep the heavy wool coat buttoned up to the chin, watching where the theater ends and the realities begin. Until the magnetic ribbon hits the copper tape guide, we maintain a position that they can't buy inside. Muted brass notes drifting through the balcony tier. Heavy drum arrangement dropping cold and severe. We keep the dialogue authentic while the scenery breaks. Raw acetate friction, ignoring what the industry fakes. Now the oxide is scraping on the last brass wheel, but the dialogue survives on its independent reel. We leave the signature scratched into the proscenium stone long after the spotlight leaves the stage completely alone. The kick drum is thumping like a backstage generator. Crank a rugged testament recorded on a blank memory bank. The mix slowly dissolves into the ventilation shaft breeze, leaving nothing but the ghost moving through the marquee keys. Vaudeville energy stays permanent. The syntax is clear, the marquee archive is the only broadcast you hear. We step through the fire exit and we vanish in the rain. Trial over musty old blast over. Trial over musty. You the blast over. Put the back and tip. Temperature on the arrangement, dropping gold as a film.
The larger. Let the vinyl static bleed out. The marquee archive. No encore. We out. We out. We out.
The sharp, echoing click of an ancient industrial ceramic fuse being pulled, followed by the steady drip of alkaline water falling onto a buckled copper breaker plate deep underground. A dusty, low-pass filtered jazz Clara loop creeps out from the dark, blowing a dry, reedy minor line that wavers slightly with tape speed fluctuation. It is layered with a faint, shivering throat until extra peanut butter staccato pluck, and a thick flourish without a single second of labor. The 93 BPM drum break drops. The kick is punchy, compressed, and laden with sub-bass distortion, while the snare cracks with a sharp, dry wooden slap over a thick blanket of continuous lacquer dust crackle. A gritty, low-tone voice speaks instantly.
3:22 a.m. Standing inside the cavernous, pitch black generator hall of the abandoned Long Island City Power Station, right on the edge of Newtown Creek. 4 giant brick smoke stacks, pissing the midnight sky like hollow pillars, rusted iron walkways, hanging suspended over empty turbine pits. The heavy smell of ozone, coal dust, stagnant canal water, and damp transformer oil.
block that breathy jazz, clearing it loose straight onto the master track sequence. No industry shortcuts, no commercial packaging, strictly raw mechanical current from the dead grid of the borough. Listen close. Yeah, navigating through the turbine pits where the copper bleeds, documenting the friction that the modern matrix breeds. I split the clarinet loop till the Weaver notes fracture, weaving a dense tapestry that the charts can't manufacture. The low frequent pace, the bass vibrates through the brick wall, while the ghosts of the industrial age answer the call. The snare snaps crisp like a high voltage line snapping loose, leaving an indelible mark that no labels can reduce. We don't buy the digital real estate or the fake metrics, we just chart the topography through the broken electrics. Just a midnight shadow stepping over the discarded iron gears, pouring raw ink through the architecture of the forgotten years.
Haunting clarinet phrases drifting through the dead switchboard. Heavy drum arrangements cut like a cold iron sword. We keep the underground pulsing through the circuit decay. Pure analog weight, driving all the static away. Haunting clarinet phrases drifting through the dead switchboard. Heavy drum arrangements cut like a cold iron sword. We keep the underground pulsing through the circuit decay. Pure analog weight, driving all the static away.
Yeah, the road staccato lingers on a secondary stem matrix, isolating honest dialogue from the algorithmic theatrics. Strict operational focus, observing how the system cracks, refusing to dilute the transmission on these independent tracks. We slice the minor cadence till the playback head begins to fill out the feed and raw calculations directly to the outcast. And the gut of the drum sampler punches with that uncompressed garage heat, the exact type of winter ledger that the radio can't repeat. Keep the canvas utility coat button tight for the cold draft, watching how the corporate entity tries to commercialize the craft until the oxide strips reach the edge of the guidepost. We hold a perimeter secure like an unyielding ghost.
Haunting clarinet phrases drifting through the dead switchboard. Heavy drum arrangements cut like a cold iron sword. We keep the underground pulsing through the circuit decay. Pure analog weight, driving all the static away. Haunting clarinet phrases drifting through the dead switchboard. Heavy drum arrangements cut like a cold iron sword. We keep the underground pulsing through the circuit decay. Pure analog weight, driving all the static away.
Now the magnetic ribbon is winding down to the final turn, but the lexicon remains intact for the elements to burn. We leave the coordinates stamped deep in the rusted iron beam, long after the metropolis wakes up from its digital dream. The kick drum is thumping like a heavy hydraulic piston crank, a rugged monument recorded on a completely blank bank. The arrangement slowly dissolves into the morning fog bank. It's a cold testament to the format that the commercial channels miss. Center of energy stays permanent, the syntax is tight. The foundry thesis dominates the remainder of the night. We scale the curve again and down again, we dissolve in the gray.
Yeah, station logic. Let the vinyl static bleed out. The foundry thesis. Grid shut down. We out.
Echoing of a rusted iron prison cell door. The gavel paradigm, case dismissed. We are.
A tyrant, Beaux-Arts limestone monument now rotting in total isolation. Massive bronze doors warped by time. Shattered skylights letting the cold night air rain down on the ruined jury boxes. Rusted holding cages on the top floor overlooking the tracks. The heavy smell of wet plaster, oxidized iron, decomposing legal transcripts and decades of trapped dust. Lock that weeping lap steel guitar loop straight onto the master track layout. No commercial compromise and no radio friendly hooks. Strictly the unvarnished acoustics of the final summation. Listen close.
Yeah, walking through the courtroom where the judgment failed, spitting raw conviction where the prisoners were jailed. I slice the lap steel loop till the slide notes weep, etching dark graffiti where the legal ledger sleep. The low and bass line thumps through the marble floor, while the wind rattles the broken jury door. The snare hits hard like a gavel striking wood, reclaiming the perspective that they never understood. We skip the legal traps and the major label binds. We just decode the static in these independent minds. Just a nocturnal scribe tracking ink across the stone, delivering the summation completely on my own. Weeping slide guitars echoing through the holding cage. Heavy drum configurations turning the final page. We keep the rhythm uncompromised behind the iron bars. Pure analog weight under the distant northern stars. Yeah, the faint organ tone hovers on a parallel track. Got a ledger full of pressure that the system couldn't track. Cold calculated logic, watching how the structure splits, slicing through the fabric before the power station quits. We chop the minor scale till the audio signal breaks, exposing every single angle that the industry fakes. The
1-minute drum sampler drops that raw unedited punch. The exact type of poetry the corporate sharks want to lunch. Keep the canvas field coat sit tight against the draft, defending the integrity of this underground craft until the magnetic ribbon hits the copper spindle base. We maintain a raw execution in this forgotten space. We've been slide guitars echoing through the holding cage, heavy drum configurations turning the final page. We keep the rhythm uncompromised behind the iron bars, pure analog weight under the distant northern stars. Now the tape is running thin on the final real exchange, but the syntax remains and there's nothing left to change. We leave the philosophy scratched into the judge's bench long after the elements consume the plaster and the stench. The kick drum is thumping like a heavy iron vault door shut, a rugged monument slicing through the corporate cut. The arrangement slowly sinks into the early morning hum, a grim manifestation of where the actual rhymes come from. Just as energy stays permanent, the target is defined. The gavel paradigm is the only signal left behind. We drop down the fire, escaping dissolved in the gray. We get the raw extortion in this forgotten space. We've been slide guitars echoing through the holding cage, heavy drum configurations turning the final page. We keep the rhythm uncompromised behind the iron bars, pure analog weight under the distant northern stars. Yeah, courthouse logic. Let the shellac hiss bleed out. The gavel paradigm. Case dismissed. We out. Yeah. Case dismissed. We out. Thick dripping of condensation falling from a corroded steel roof truss into a pool of stagnant, iridescent chemical sludge below, mixed with the distant low frequency joined the Gowanus Expressway. A dusty low pass filter chromatic jazz harmonica loop wails out from the dark, breathing the weeping bent minor phrase that shivers within the log tape wow and flutter. It is layered with a faint shivering vintage Wurlitzer electric pan and a heavy dragon double bass line. Without a single second of delay, the 94 BPM drum break drops. The kick hits dry, boxy and heavily compressed. The snare snaps with a sharp high mid-biting crack over a continuous layer of vintage acetate surface noise. A gritty low-tone voice speaks instantly.
4:26 a.m. deep inside of the hollow monolithic brick shell of the abandoned Brooklyn Rapid Transit. Looming over the black waters of the Gowanus Canal. Massive concrete vertebrae stripped of the turbines. Towering arched windows patched with rusted corrugated tin. Decades of legendary street are fading under layers of industrial soot. The heavy smell of coal tar, old battery acid, stagnant canal silt and damn masonry. Keep that haunting chromatic harmonica loop locked straight into the mix out the texture. No commercial gloss, no generic trap loop. Strictly raw magnetic friction from the forgotten industrial core of Brooklyn. Listen close. Navigating through the oil slick sumps where the iron bleeds, documenting the cold fallout that the modern culture breeds. A segment the harmonica phrase until the reed notes buckle, leaving raw carbon prints on the microphone knuckle. The low double basses dragging through the subterranean silt while the track dissects the empire that the syndicates built. The snare snaps vicious like a no circuit breaker flip, slicing through the heavy silence of the unedited strip. We don't solicit the attention of the digital brokers, we just drop the heavy weight for the midnight smokers. Just a faceless operator tracking lines in the damp air, exposing the skeletal system that the labels wouldn't dig. Haunting blues notes echoing through the turbine floor, raw drum machinery knocking outside the iron door. We keep the frequency unplasticized behind the brick walls, uncut lack of dust answering the inner city calls. Yeah, the shivering Wurlitzer racks and hovers on a parallel track. Got a dossier, give raw pressure that the editors can't track. Strict structural calculus, tracking how the pavement divides, piercing straight through the illusions where the consensus resides. We chop the minor interval until the playback it stutters, delivering the raws catalog directly to the gutters. The vintage drum machine thumps with that unquantized weight, the exact type of winter broadcast that the radios hate. Keep the heavy utility parker zip high for the toxic breeze, watching how the corporate engine makes the independent freeze until the oxide ribbon runs completely off the brass wheel. We maintain a raw execution on this independent rail. Haunting blues notes echoing through the turbine floor, raw drum machinery knocking outside the iron door. We keep the frequency unplasticized behind the brick walls, uncut lack of dust answering the inner city calls. Yeah, back at dark of those Monday. Yeah. Now the tape is scraping aluminum on the final guide pin, but the manuscript survives before the early shift crawls, and we leave the philosophy engraved deep in the soot-stained brick. Long after the digital algorithm stop, they frantic click. The kick drum is thumping like some industrial power driver stroke, a solid monument to the unfiltered truths that we spoke. The audio slowly submerges into the morning traffic comical documentation of where the actual poetry comes from. Subterranean energy remains absolute and strict. The obsidian chapter is the only zone we predict. We climb through the broken brickwork and vanish in the mist thing.
SOT, static bleed out. The obsidian chapel, grit isolated. We out, we out, we out, we out, we out, we out, we out.
Metallic clanging of a rusted signal box door, banging violently in the wind, followed by the dry crunch of wild gravel and dead canopy leaves under rebooted dusty low-pass filtered jazz. Accordion loop crawls out from the blackness, spinning a breathy, wheezing minor chord progression that wavers with heavy tape flutter. It is layered with a faint, shivering vintage, strict second-size note, and the beat hits muddy, compressed, and heavy at the sub-frequencies. The snare snaps with a dry, unquantized wooden crack over a continuous blanket of vintage vinyl surface noise. A gritty, low-tone voice speaks instantly.
3:51 a.m. standing high on the rusted elevated steel trestle of the abandoned lie. Rockaway Beach branch line hidden deep within the overgrown woods of Ozone Park. Queens decaying iron railway bridges swallowed completely by wild trees. Dead track lines leading into the dark void. The heavy smell of old creosote, rusted rail spikes, wet pine needles, and cold midnight air. Keep that wheezing accordion phrase locked tight into the track layout. No commercial compromises, no radio-friendly formula. Strictly raw transit friction from the forgotten grid of the borough. Listen close, listen close, listen close. Walking the elevated bridge where the iron rail cracks, leaving no digital footprints on these forgotten tracks. I chop the accordion loop till the internal bellows bleed, sowing in the monetized industry hound a culture seed. The sub bass sits low through the concrete support column, delivering a raw manuscript, heavy and solemn. The snare snaps like a rusty signal alarm, dropping cold, preserving the hidden New York story that was never sold. We bypassed the mainstream channels in the playlist hype. We just engraved the actual logic in its purest type. Just a midnight trespasser cutting through the thick brush, keeping the focus sharp without a single frantic rush.
Wheezing accordion notes drifting down the railway line.
Thick drum configurations hitting the raw design.
We keep the frequency isolated above the street level grid.
Pure and analog weight revealing what the canopy here. The shivering syntone hovers on the parallel track bank, extracting unfiltered voltage from an old industrial tank. Strict analytical metrics, watching the transit line warp, slicing straight through the illusions of the commercial court. We segment the minor scale until the playback tape flutters, feeding raw definitions directly to the outcasts and gutters. The vintage sampler punches with that authentic garage smoke, the exact type of winner blueprint that the critics never spoke. Keep the heavy canvas coat zip tight for the night air, documenting the texture that the corporate wouldn't dare until the oxide strip runs off the aluminum spindle wheel. We maintain the raw execution on this independent reel.
Wheezing accordion notes drifting down the railway line.
Thick drum configurations hitting the raw design.
We keep the frequency isolated above the street level grid.
Pure and analog weight revealing what the canopy hid. Now the magnetic ribbon is scraping on the final guidepost, but the syllable survives like an unlisted transit ghost. We leave the signature scratched into the rusted signal box frame long after the digital network forgets the actual name. The kick drum is thumping like a heavy iron tile plate, strike a rugged monument rising over the highway in the pike. The arrangement slowly sinks into the early morning bird chorus, leaving nothing but the echoes moving through the forest. Elevated energy stays permanent, the syntax is clear. The signal disruption is the only broadcast you hear. We drop down the rusted iron ladder and vanish in the mist.
Yeah, railway logic.
Let the vinyl static bleed out.
The signal disruption.
Bad isolated, but we out, we out, we out, we out, we out, we out, we out. Yeah. Railway logic. Let the vinyl static bleed out. The signal disruption. Rod isolated. We out. We out. We out. We out. We out.
The sharp hollow rattle of a rusted iron dumb where the cable's scraping inside a dark shaft, followed by the dry crunch of shattered laboratory glass and petrified leather bindings under a dusty low-pass filtered jazz. Where Sim Luke creeps out from the void, spinning a stiff morning minor phrase that wavers with heavy tape saturation. It is layered with a faint, shivering vintage electric crocs and chord stab in a thick walking quillines without a single second of delay to 91 BPM drums. The kick hits thick, boxy, and heavily compressed. The snare snaps with a dry, unquantized wooden crack over continuous blanket of lacquer dust crackle. A gritty, low-tone voice speaks instantly.
3:14 a.m. deep inside the crumbling roofless brick shell of the abandoned smallpox hospital on the southern tip of Roosevelt Island, marooned in the middle of the East River. Skeletal Gothic revival arches swallowed alive by invasive ivy, hollow pointed windows framing the blinding neon skyline of Midtown Manhattan. Across the Blackwater, heavy smell of damp moss, decomposing limestone and cold river currents keep that dusty bassoon loop locked tight into the track layout. No generic industry patterns, no recycled verses, strictly the raw architecture of the isolation ward. Listen close. Walking through the Gothic ruins where the masonry breaks, spitting cold obsidian lines over the heavy heartaches. I chop the bassoon loop to the reed frequency warps, a grim cinematic layout for the city's old ghost. A deep bass line is rumbling low in the riverbed rock, while the lookouts track the ferry from a crumbling stone dock. The hard snare snaps like a heavy iron padlock, popping cold, preserving the unfiltered narrative that never was told. We don't seek the validation of a mainstream review, we just map the dark topography and slice it into just a midnight phantom, tracking footprints through the overgrown weeds, planting the anonymous counterculture seed.
Rubbing rolling notes echoing off the granite wall.
Deep bass lines dropping while the heavy shadows fall.
Keep the underground pulsing through the structural rust. Authentic continuity long before the gold turns to dust.
Yeah, the hopsicon stabs drift heavy through the fractures of floor. Got the chill of the East River creeping right through the door. Calculated isolation, keeping the vision untamed, seeing straight through the tactics that the majors compiled. We chop the minor scales to the audio signal distorts, delivering the raw scriptures through the clinical chords. The drum machine is knocking with that authentic kiss, the exact type of winner project that the algorithms miss. Keep the heavy wool collar flipped against the island draft, watching how the corporate syndicate exploits the craft until there's nothing left but static on the master tape spool. We deliver the grim reality, breaking every single rule.
Violently notes echoing off the granite wall.
Deep bass lines dropping while the heavy shadows fall.
We keep the underground pulsing through the structural rust. Authentic continuity long before the gold turns to dust. Or the gold turns to dust. Or the gold turns to dust. Or the gold turns to dust.
Now the real hits the metal flange on the very last spin, but there's still a couple chapters before the daylight sets in. We leave the philosophy X deep in the stone long after the whole metropolis is left completely alone. The kick drum is thumping like an industrial piston stroke, a rugged monument to the words that we spoke. The track slowly dissolves into the early morning hum, a cold reminder of where the actual poetry comes from. Subterranean energy stays permanent, the focus is deep. The after hours theory dominates while the city's asleep. We step through the iron gate and we vanish in the gray. Yeah.
All them moving notes echoing off the granite wall. Deep bass lines dropping.
Let the vinyl static bleed out. Raw architecture read. The hours theory, we out.
All them moving notes echoing off the granite wall. Deep bass lines dropping.
Let the vinyl static bleed out. Raw architecture read. The hours theory, we out.
Rustic and bedroom belt housing high above, mixed with the slow on your bench or wooden fender piles of the Henry Street bass in a dusty low pass filtered jazz soprano saxon loop crawls out from the blackness, spinning an erratic breathy minor scale that warps with heavy lacquerware. It is layered with a faint shivering farfisa organ stab and a thick sinker double bass line. Without a single second of delay, the 90 BPM drum break drops. The kick hits muddy, compressed, and laden with sub-bass weight. The snare snaps with a dry, unquantized wooden crack over a continuous layer of thick lacquer dust crackle or gritty.
Low-tone voice speaks instantly. 4:09 a.m. standing at the base of the abandoned Red Hook grain terminal, towering over the industrial waterfront of South Brooklyn. 50 massive, decaying concrete silos lifting like an ancient fortress into the midnight fog. Rusted elevator housings hanging like dead iron limbs. The heavy smell of salt crust, harbor grease, cold stone, and decades of petrified grain dust keep that reedy soprano sax loop locked tight in the track layout. No commercial edits, no radio gloss, strictly raw and allo continuity from the concrete monolith. Listen close, listen close, listen close. Passing through the shadow where the elevator stands, leaving raw expressions on the unrecorded lands. I split the saxophone loop till the reedy notes split, forging an unpolished framework where the realities fit. The low currents vibrates through the harbor wall while the coastal phantoms answer the immediate call. The snare snaps heavy like a rusted crane chain, snapping free, isolating every frequency that they don't want you to see. We don't track the digital charts or the streaming stats, we just document the asphalt where the midnight cats navigate the boundary line of the forgotten coast, leaving an authentic signal from an unlisted host.
Reedy Greedy saxophone lines echoing down the empty slip.
Heavy drum breaks pounding while the harbor waters
We
rip.
keep the audio uncut inside the industrial shell.
Pure and analog friction breaking the commercial spell.
Yeah, the fall fees organ hovers on the secondary track. Got a catalog of raw thoughts, the editors were packed. Strict coastal observation, seeing our skyline fades. Cutting straight through the illusions of their corporate trades. We slice the minor cadence till the playback head stutters. Delivering the cold definition straight from the gutters. The vintage sampler hits with that uncompressed soot, leaving an indelible stamp where the industry can foot. Keep the canvas deck jacket zipped against the harbor draft, protecting the integrity of this independent craft until the shellac spool spins down to the center pin. We hold the position true before the morning shifts begin.
Greedy saxophone lines echoing down the empty slip.
Heavy drum breaks pounding while the harbor waters rip.
Keep the audio uncut inside the industrial shell.
Pure and analog friction breaking the commercial spell. Now the lacquer is scraping on the final needle pass, but the syllable remains sharp like shattered industrial glass. We leave the coordinates written deep in the concrete moss, long after the financial district counts its final loss. The kick drum is thumping like a heavy cargo winch stroke, a solid testament to the unfiltered words that we spoke. The arrangement slowly sinks into the morning fog. Then come a grim reminder of where the actual narratives come from. Waterfront energy stays permanent, the target is defined. The terminal doctrine is the only broadcast left behind. We scale a perimeter gate and vanish in the mist.
Greedy saxophone lines echoing down the empty slip.
Yeah, terminal logic. Let the static bleed out. Pure analog friction.
Greedy saxophone lines, saxophone line.
Saxophone line. Down the empty slip. Pure analog friction. 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 Terminal logic. Grid isolated. We out. We out.
Distant. Cavernous rumble of a 6-train curving sharply on the upper loop, vibrating through forgotten brickwork, followed by the dry metallic click of an antique brass padlock chain. An antique brass padlock chain, a dusty low pass filtered. Jazz trumpet loop crawls from the shadows, blowing a piercing midnight phrase through a tight harmon mute. It is layered with an icy brittle vintage DX7 electric piano bound that walks an unquantized drag. Without a single second of delay, the NYC BPM drum break drops. The kick hits up heavy, raw and cavernous. The snare snaps with a drop, metallic slap over a continuous hiss of aged lack of surface noise. Gritty, low-tone voice speaks instantly. Yeah, 3:18 a.m. standing on the curved, dust-blanketed platform of the abandoned city hall subway station. Sealed deep beneath the frantic streets of lower Manhattan, a subterranean masterpiece from 9 to 4 left in total darkness. Majestic Astavino vaulted ceilings covered in green and tan tiles. Leaded glass skylights choked with street soot and rusted brass chandeliers hanging over empty tracks. The heavy smell of ancient iron filings, damp masonry, stale subterranean air and break dust. Lock the muted trumpet loop straight into a recording grid. No synthesized shortcuts, no algorithmic bait. Strictly raw underground heritage from the original vault. Listen close, listen close, listen close. Navigating the curved platform where the arches meet. Carving timeless dialogue beneath the city's feet. I segment the trumpet loop until the brass notes bleed. Planting an uncoalition independent culture seed. The low end frequencies resonate through the tile grout, while the track isolates the system that we rhyme about. The snare cracks sharp like a high voltage third rail spark, slicing directly through the heavy silence of the dark. We don't chase the digital trends or the playlist placement. We just document the marrow from the deepest basement, just to face the scribe, tracing patterns in the dust layer, exposing the skeletal truth to the honest player.
Corn textures echoing down the curved track line. Heavy drum machinery driving through the raw design. We keep the frequency sovereign beneath the park ground. Uncut acetate crackle, preserving the authentic sound. Corn textures echoing down the curved track line. Heavy drum machinery driving through the raw design. We keep the frequency sovereign beneath the park ground. Uncut acetate crackle, preserving the authentic
the
sound.
brittle DX7 bell chime hovers on a parallel track. Got an archive of raw thought that the executive would slash. Pure tactical alignment, indexing the true design, refusing to dilute the message for that corporate line. We slice the minor chord progression till the tape speed wavers, delivering the unpolished manuscript, the true flavor. flavor versus the vintage drum machine knocks with that uncompressed smoke. The exact type of winner catalog that the mainstream broke. Keep the leather bomber jacket zipped against the tunnel chill, measuring historical density until the master tape is still. No superficial edits or radio friendly sound design, just a natural cultural weight of all time.
Texas echoing down the curved track line. Heavy drum machinery driving through the raw design. We keep the frequency sovereign beneath the park ground.
Uncut asses take crackle, preserving the authentic sound.
That horn Texas echoing down the curved track line. Heavy drum machinery driving through the raw design. We keep the frequency sovereign beneath the park ground.
Uncut asses take crackle, preserving the authentic sound.
Now the oxide ribbon is approaching the dead leader strip, but the testimony remains locked in an absolute grip. We leave the signature etched deep into the ceramic tile, long after the superficial charts go out of style. A bass drum strikes heavy like a line switch, throwing cold, a rugged monument to the narratives that can't be sold. The arrangement slowly dissolves into the tunnel ventilation hits, a cold reminder of the depth that the commercial channels miss. Subterranean energy stays permanent, the focus is great, the sovereign slate dominate the current state. We climb the emergency hatch and vanish in the midnight mist. Yeah, fault logic. Let the lack of static bleed out. Raw underground heritages. Sovereign slate. Station closed. We out. The sharp mechanical snap of a tape deck button popping up, followed by absolute silence.
Yeah, 2:47 a.m. inside the collapsing Ivy cover ruins of the abandoned Riverside Hospital, North Brother Island. Marooned in the treacherous currents between the Bronx and Rikers Island. The dark, legendary quarantine wards where the city isolated its contagious ghosts, rotting wooden floorboards, sinking into the cellar mud. The heavy smell of damp river moss, sulfurous salt air, ancient formaldehyde and decaying mortar. Keep that breathless jazz flute loop locked tight in the primary sequence. No industry formulas, no artificial streaming bait, strictly raw quarantine pressure from the forgotten island grid. Listen close, slow. Trudging through the war where their contagion spread, carving honest syllables where the pavement is dead. I slice the flute loop till the silver keys rattle, preparing the mind for the independent battle. The low fuzz bass is shaking through the brick foundation, while the city across the water faces mental stagnation. The snare hits sharp like a quarantine gate locking, slicing through the nonsense that the mainstream is hawking. We don't trade the marrow for the corporate budget lines. We just track the truth within these localized designs. Just a midnight ghost dodging the patrol boat glare, leaving permanent stains on the contaminated stair. Breathy flute melodies cutting through the overgrown hall. Thick bass dynamics driving while the brickwork falls. We keep the broadcast unlinked from the mainland wire. Pure lack of dust fueling the internal fire. The distorted clavinet stab echoes on a parallel track. Got a vault full of friction that the editors were back. Analytical perspective watching how the narrative warps. Walking through the shadows of the old metal course. We chop the minor interval until the ribbon starts to slide. Delivering the raw doctrine that they try to hide. The vintage drum machine thumps with that uncompressed smoke. The exact type of winter legend that the radio broke. Keep the heavy canvas collar turned against the river breeze. Watching how the commercial market makes the artist freeze. Until the magnetic ribbon runs completely off the core. We maintain a raw standard on this isolated shore. Reedy flute melodies cutting through the overgrown hall. Thick bass dynamics driving while the brickwork falls. We keep the broadcast unlinked from the mainland wire. Pure lack of dust fueling the internal fire. Now the oxide is flaking on a final real exchange, but the independent manuscript is out of their range. We leave the coordinates engraved deep in the wall mold. Long after the superficial metrics grow completely cold, the kick drum is thumping like a distant tugboat engine stroke. A solid testament to the unfiltered words that we spoke. The arrangement slowly sinks into the morning fog bank hiss. A cold reminder of the depth that the commercial channels miss. Isolation energy stays permanent. The target is defined. The contagion chapter is the only broadcast left behind. We launched the rubber zodiac and vanish in the gray. Let the vinyl static bleed out.
Ghetto right away. Ghetto right away.
Got a corner, Frank.
Ghetto right away.
What?
Ghetto right away.
The hollow metallic screech of a rusted iron window. The hollow metallic screech of a rusted iron window. That hollow metallic screech.
The 12 a.m. deep inside the sprawling abandoned brick ruins of the Seaview Hospital sanatorium, isolated in the dense dark woods of the Staten Island Greenbelt. The decaying 1930 tuberculosis colony where the city sent its forgotten patients collapse. Some porches choked with invasive wild weeds, rusted wrought iron gurneys standing in empty hydrotherapy halls. The heavy smell of damp pine bark, peeling lead paint, old plaster dust and cold forest fog. Locked the grinding ham and organ sequence straight onto the master tape deck layout. No commercial edits, no industry compromise, strictly raw clinical friction from the forgotten ridges of the outer borough. Listen close. Yeah, Stepping through the sanatorium corridors where the plaster peels, documenting how the actual underground architect feels. I segment the organ loop until the Leslie Road is stalled, leaving permanent black ink on this mosaic to wall. The low against the bass line is vibrating through the slate, while the narrative uncovers what the metrics try to hate. The snare drops hard like a heavy oak entrance door slamming, slicing straight through the commercial frequencies that jamming. We don't fill out the applications or ask for their permission. We just map the dark geography and launch the execution. Just a nocturnal phantom tracking lines in the damn dark, leaving an unlisted signet underside the historic park.
I'm all over Tennis Street.
Yeah, chords, gripping, grinding organ chords, drifting down a riding board. Heavy drum pattern striking like a blunt iron sword. We keep the dial authentic where the shadows interlock. Pure tape saturation ticking like a midnight clock. Grinding organ chords, drifting down a riding board. Heavy drum pattern striking like a blunt iron sword. We keep the dial authentic where the shadows interlock. Pure tape saturation ticking like a midnight clock. Yeah. Yeah, the shivering syndrome hovers on the parallel stem. Got a folder full of calculus that I won't leak to them. Strict independent focus tracking how the structure rusts, refusing to dilute the thesis for the corporate trust. We chop the minor interval until the playback signal weaves, feeding raw definition straight to the dwellers under the eaves. The vintage drum machine thumps with that uncompressed soot, leaving an indelible stamp where the mainstream can't foot. Keep the heavy utility jacket button to the collarbone, watching how the industry turns a vibrant into stone until the oxide strip runs completely off the brass reel wheel. We preserve the raw execution on this independent reel. Yeah. Riding organ chords, drifting down a riding board. Heavy drum pattern striking like a blunt iron sword. We keep the dial authentic where the shadows interlock. Pure tape saturation ticking like a midnight clock. Riding organ chords, drifting down a riding board. Heavy drum pattern striking like a blunt iron sword. We keep the dial authentic where the shadows interlock. Pure tape saturation ticking like a midnight clock. Now the magnetic ribbon is scraping on the final aluminum guide, but the independent manuscript is safely locked inside. We leave the equations engraved deep in the brickwork mold. Long after the superficial playlist numbers grow cold, a kick drum is thumping like an old boiler room crank. A rugged monument recorded on a blank memory bank. The mix slowly dissolves into the morning valley mist, a cold testament to the depth that the charts never list. Sanatorium energy stays permanent, the focus is pure. The isolation ledger is the only broadcast to endure. We step out through the broken terrace and vanish in the trees. Yeah, we hear the drum break cut. Yeah, how the snatic red out the isolation ledger. Be no frequency. Yeah. 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 Sanatorium logic. Let the vinyl static bleed out. The isolation ledger. Green belt frequency. We out.
They're all on metallic screech of the rusted iron window.
The distant metallic screech of a heavy iron war gate, swinging on a rusted spindle, followed by the dry powdery crunch of decaying medical files, shattered window glass under the thick rubber sole of dusty low-pass filtered jazz.
Electric loop creeps from the shadows, plucking a slow, weeping minor blues phrase drenched in a vintage tape echo and heavy spring reverb. It is layered with a faint shivering and aloe Senzine wave hum and a deep lumbering acoustic bass lag. Without a single second of delay, the 92 BPM drum break drops. The kick hits sub-heavy raw and deeply saturated. The snare snaps with a dry wooden paper thin thud over a continuous layer of thick lacquer surface noise. A gritty, low-tone voice speaks into
3:05 a.m. deep inside the cavernous, riding multi-story maze of building 25 at the abandoned Creedmoor Psychiatric Center, hidden in the eastern reaches of Queens Village. Thousands of abandoned institutional rooms stretching into the midnight blackness, peeling lead paint hanging like sheets of parchment from the ceilings. Rusted iron gurneys left in the hydrotherapy halls, the heavy smell of damp masonry, old mattress stuff and wild ivy and cold night fog. Lock that weeping jazz guitar loop straight onto the master track reel. No industry gimmicks, no polished radio templates, strictly raw psychological friction from the forgotten edge of the borough. Listen close. Navigating through the asylum wars where the plaster bleeds, etching raw definitions where the concrete cracks and recedes. I slice the guitar sequence till the echo trails distort, forging a sovereign manuscript inside this open air court. The low frequency bassline vibrates through the brick foundation while the city across the highway sinks into commercial stagnation. The snare drops hard like a heavy steel fire door locking, slicing straight through the nonsense that the mainstream is hawking. We don't fill out the applications or request that corporate praise. We just document the architecture as the century decays. Just a midnight shadow tracking ink across the ruined floor, leaving an unlisted signature behind the security door. Haunting guitar notes echoing through the empty day room. Thick drum configurations hitting through the midnight gloom. We keep the frequency uncompressed behind the brick wall. Uncut lack of dust, answering independent call. Yeah, the shivering symptom hovers on the parallel track matrix, isolating honest dialogue from the algorithmic theatrics. Strict operational focus, watching how the structure splits, slicing through the fabric before the power station quits. We chop the minor interval until the playback ribbon stutters, delivering the cold definition straight to the outcasts and gutters. The vintage sample of punches with that authentic garage heat, the exact type of winner blueprint that the radio can't repeat. Keep the canvas utility code button tight for the code draft, watching how the corporate entity tries to commercialize the craft until the oxide strip runs completely off the aluminum wheel. We maintain a raw execution on this independent reel. Haunted guitar notes echoing through the empty day room. Thick drum configurations hitting through the midnight gloom. We keep the frequency uncompressed behind the brick wall. Uncut lack of dust, answering independent call. Now the magnetic ribbon is winding down to the final turn, but the lexicon remains intact for the elements to burn. We leave the coordinates stamped deep in a rusted iron beam long after the metropolis wakes up from its digital dream. The kick drum is thumping like a heavy industrial piston stroke, a solid monument to the unfiltered truths that we spoke. The arrangement slowly dissolves into the morning valley mist, a cold testament to the depth that the charts never list. Institutional energy stays permanent, the focus is defined. The Tremor Codex is the only signal left behind. We step through the broken window and vanish in the trees. We out.
Asylum Lodge. Let the vinyl static bleed out. Tremor Codex. Grid isolated. We out.
Ominous groaning of rusted iron hose grinding against each other in a low tide.
The slow, ominous groaning of rusted iron hulls grind against each other in the low tide. Follow the distant hollow echo of foghorn, cutting through the mist and the mist and the mist and the river piling a dusty. Low pass filtered jazz rock, fair loop creeps out from the dark. Its muffled metal striking a cold minor chord brevishing that warps with heavy tape, wow and flutter. Its layer of faint, breathy upright bass plucking a shivering vintage electric piano accent. Without a single second of delay, the 92 BPM drum break drops. The kick hits thick, boxy, and deeply saturated at the sub-frequencies. The snare snaps with a dry, unquantized wooden crack over a continuous layer of heavy vinyl surface noise. A gritty low-tone voice speaks instantly.
4:17 a.m. Standing on a collapsing wooden pier overlooking the Staten Island boat graveyard with marine scrapyard. In Rossville, right on the edge of the Arthur Kill title strait, the skeletal rusting rib cages of dozens of abandoned 20th century merchant ships, tugboats, and historic ferries half submerged in the dark water. They oxidize iron holes, bleeding orange to the black silt, the heavy smell of low-tide mud, old diesel grease, salt crust, and freezing coastal fog. Keep that cold rack of herb sequence looping raw without any digital cleaning. No major label formulas, no algorithmic streaming bait, strictly uncut maritime pressure from the graveyard of the harbor. Listen close. Tracing geometric lines where the iron plating splits, isolating frequencies before the power circuit quits. I slice the fiber loop till the matter strikes the store, forging a unanimous script inside this coastal court. The low-end coolie bases vibrating through the mud while the night prowlers disconnect from the consumer flood. The wooden snare drops like a structural support beam breaking, exposing the fragile illusions that the main slaking. We don't buy the digital metrics or the temporary praise. We just document the architecture as the century decays. Just a midnight phantom leaving footprints on a rotten dock, escaping the confinement of the modern cultural clock. The maritime matrix echoing through the rotting home. The tenant pump seeking sticks hitting while the night grows dull. We keep the baseline locked beneath the rusted metal frame. Pure and airlock friction, refusing to play the commercial game. Yeah, the shivering roads accent hovers on a parallel track. Got a dossier, your raw pressure that the editors can't track. Strict independent focus, watching how the skyline fades, cutting straight through the illusions of the corporate trades. We segment the minor scale until the playback tape flutters, feed the raw definitions directly to the outcasts and gutters. The vintage sample of punches with that authentic garage smoke, the exact type of winner blueprint that the critics never spoke. Keep the heavy canvas deck jacket zipped against the harbor draft, protecting the integrity of this independent craft until the shell spool spins down to the center pin. We hold a position true before the morning shifts begin. The maritime matrix echoing through the rotting hall. Heavy drum sequences hitting while the night grows dull. We keep the baseline locked beneath the rusted metal frame. Pure and unlocked friction, refusing to play the commercial game. Now the oxide is scraping on the final aluminum flange, but the syllable surviving, there's nothing left to change. We leave the mathematics written deep in the scaling rust. Long after the empire turns to architecture and the dust, the kick drum is thumping like a heavy cargo wind stroke, a permanent monument to the words of the unlisted professor. The arrangement slowly sinks into the morning bird calls, leaving nothing but echoes bouncing off the iron walls. Maritime energy stays permanent, the blueprint is defined. The Arthur Kill matrix is the only broadcast left behind. We scale the chain link barrier and vanish in the mist. Graveyard logic. Let the vinyl static bleed out. Crystalline resonance. The Arthur Kill matrix. We out. We out. The